Okay, afternoon all. I've been given the graveyard slot, so hopefully whatever I say is interesting enough to keep everyone awake, but let's see how that goes. Kind of a clickbaity title, but the title of my talk is Shifting Left Without Being Cuffed, or, maybe in more plain English, how to fail fast in a highly regulated environment. So, before we get started, who am I? My name is Adam Smith. I've been working in software for coming on 4 years, I guess, give or take. And all of that has been at Allan Gray, so kind of indoctrinated into the way they do things, but feel pretty confident that we're doing at least some good things, which is cool. And a point of clarification, I work in the retail side of the business. So there's the separation, which we'll get into, but I have been in the retail side, the whole side, the whole time I've been with the company, and the reason that's important may become clear, or hopefully it does. Cool, so just to give you a roadmap of what you can expect during the presentation. So I'm going to start off, if you guys have watched any presentations online about sort of the general topics in DevOps, you'll know that, well, firstly you'll know that there's a lot of them, and in an attempt to avoid repeating a lot of things that are said, I wanted to start off this presentation by just presenting some universal truths. And they are universal truths of this presentation, so maybe they can be argued with. But yeah, I think for the presentation we'll start there, so we hopefully all coming at this from the same point. Then I'll talk about, kind of give some context, so what things looked like when I joined Allan Gray, kind of a general overview of where we were in terms of governance we had and where we are in terms of the systems we had. Then the problem statement, which you've already got a hint of, followed by some idea of where we are now in our systems, which I think is important because it speaks to other things in the presentation. So that context now. Then 4 focus areas that we looked at in terms of our governance, the vision we developed, and then how we abided by that governance while going fast, or actually I like to think of it how we used the governance that we put in place to aid us to go faster. Then tooling, so how did we actually do this? And finally, where that leaves us now. Cool, so that's kind of what we have in store. I thought of a good joke, so I'll tell it now. I know I'm wearing an Office N shirt, but if you're looking for the State of the Developer Nation talk, this isn't that talk. I don't work for Office N, they just do good merch. I've been trying to work on Allan Gray to do some merch. Don't know if we'll get there, I'm not sure. Anyway, so the 4 I say the 4, there's actually 5 of them, but sort of some universal truths, there may be more, but some that came to mind for this presentation. So the first are sort of general DevOps things, which is that, generally change lead time we want to be low, we want our change failure rate to be low, we want high deployment frequency, and we want low mean time to recovery. Now, I think we can all agree on all of those. Deployment frequency, I think, is the only one maybe people could be a little bit contentious about, but feel like in the world that we're in now, everyone agrees on that. And then something, and I think it's sort of the crux of the talk is, in my opinion, we want to empower teams to own their own stuff. So teams owning their own stuff is a very good thing. So yeah, what's the context? When I joined Allan Gray, I was told I shouldn't say things are not great. I actually said I wouldn't say that, but things were not great. And I don't mean that in terms, I kind of mean that in terms of how we were doing CI/CD or not doing CI/CD at the time. And so the way we were kind of doing things is we were doing these monthly releases, and I remember it was quite exciting when I first joined, but I was a grad, I'd come in straight out of university, and then, it was the last Friday night of the month, or the first Friday, I can't remember, but a Friday night, and we all stayed late in the office, we all got pizza, and we went through this really arduous release process where we'd orchestrated how everything was going to happen, what was going to happen when, which systems were going to go in, and all of that. And this was a release night, and these happened sort of monthly, and we had this whole coordinated release process where we'd start deving, start working on features, and then you'd have a week of user testing or UAT testing before finally you'd come to this Friday night. Now, you'd basically have to opt into this release train, which meant you could have your application get super out of date in production. Because basically things are only happening monthly. Yeah. And the other thing that's important to talk about in this whole process is a lot of this was done by an ops team, and there was a big separation between ops and our devs. And it's sort of the traditional thing that DevOps has tried to solve is that conflict, right? Because our ops teams are measured on all those metrics about not breaking things, stability of production, et cetera, and our dev teams, hopefully want to get stuff into production. And so we had basically also we would orchestrate this whole release process, then we'd get to the end, and we're trying to then hand off to people who actually knew nothing about the systems. So yeah, as I said, things weren't great. I think this was informed by a number of things. The one thing this was informed by is Allan Gray has a very long history and had a few monoliths. It had some monoliths basically that came in and did fantastic work, and some of them are still hanging on with us today. And the longevity of those systems, it's quite impressive actually. But yeah, so that sort of deployment cycle was informed by those monoliths, but it was also informed by another thing, and that was risk. And basically, in trying to mitigate risk, this whole process had been determined. So we were saying, look, we need to control how things get into production. We're a reputable firm. We are a very large asset manager. We manage clients' money. People need to be able to trust us. We can't deploy broken things, or we should not deploy broken things. We shouldn't fail. Things should be controlled, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that led to things basically slowing down and getting into this process where there's trusted people, the ops team, and they're the ones who can access production. They're the ones who can put these changes in. Then there's the devs. There's a large separation, and as devs, you can't touch production yourself. You can't make those changes in. You can't make any changes yourself, And so basically, your ownership ends quite early in the process, and there's still a whole lot of steps that have to happen to get changes into production that you as a developer sort of hand off. And I mean, I can talk to them, but hopefully you can see the issues with that. I mean, just to say, when you have people who are putting stuff into production where they don't understand what it is or what it does, then how do they know when it's broken or not broken, among other issues. So that kind of brings us to the problem to solve. Our problem statement was, how do we maintain that governance we had in place? We had, I would say, good. We had good risk control. We didn't let weird changes get into production, but we were going really slowly. And there was a lot of problems that were coming and a lot of pain points in that system being a developer. So in order to solve that problem, well, now I'm going to hopefully tell you how we solved that problem, and you guys can learn something from that. But the start of solving that problem is we changed a lot of the tooling. We changed a lot of the stuff we were using. This slide's got a bit weird. I don't know why tooling is floating over there. And I wanted to put this up also because I just feel like I can't have a DevOps talk without putting a slide like this where you put a random bunch of technologies on a slide. But we migrated across from sort of this monolithic architecture. We started breaking things up into microservices. I don't know if anyone attended the top 5 things or the bad things we did a lot of that, So we did some bad things, we did some good things, and we kind of broke up a lot of our applications and had a much more microservice, and now live with a much more microservice dominated architecture. So that's the context of where we are today. And so now to go back to remind you, so the problem statement we're trying to address is we have these governance restrictions, we have these risks that we want to mitigate, being the company that we are. And so now in this context that we find ourselves, what could we do? Well, this was a couple of years ago. What could we do to try and improve things, hopefully go a bit faster? And some clever people in the business came in and said, okay, look, there's 4 things we have to focus on. So the first is the actual governance. So we've decided that this going slow that we're doing, where we have this release train, where only very specific people can touch production, et cetera, that's not really working. It means that we have these big bang deployments. It means that when things get into production, the people who are taking them in don't know what's going in, et cetera. So first we have to address, what do we actually want to do? You can't start doing things before you address that. Then, we need to address how we're going to do that. So it's all very well to have these grand ideas, but we need to actually develop tooling or use tooling. And then the other 2 areas were the environments. So the environments we had are non-production environments, and the access. So how do we control access? Who can access what? In this talk, I won't talk to environments and access. I think those were very specific, or maybe access there could be a general talk on that. But environments was a very specific thing, the way, where we'd come from, et cetera. So I don't know how useful or interesting anyone would find that. So let's start the logical place, governance. So what did we want to do? So I went, in preparing for this talk, and read our governance document. And I don't really like wordy slides, but I felt like I liked this. This is taken almost directly from our governance document, which outlines, how are we going to change what we're doing, increase our speed, while still maintaining some risk consciousness. So I'm going to read it off for you, although I know it's bad presentation form, but we wanted to apply various methodologies to our software delivery approach, depending on what is deemed appropriate, for solutions to be most effective, to inculcate a DevOps culture, and to allow autonomous delivery while remaining risk conscious. So we wanted to go from this place where there was this big separation between developers and ops, and bring these things together in the hope that we could go faster, develop more effective solutions, shift responsibility left, empower our teams to deliver good software quickly. And in doing that, we outlined a development lifecycle. Now, I'm sure everyone in this room, or has everyone seen a development lifecycle? I assume everyone has. Maybe raise your hand if you have, just so people can move. Cool. So we defined a development lifecycle, and I think the reason why I wanted to show this, the reason why this is interesting, is because we specifically wanted to talk. So I want to talk to 2 points on this. So firstly, we wanted to say, why were we doing each thing? So we didn't want to just take some development lifecycle, be like, people say this is a good idea, and then do it. We wanted to say, why do we want to do things? And we used 3 criteria: fit for purpose, quality check, and authorization. So we said, these are the reasons we want to do these steps in the development lifecycle. And the second thing, which isn't actually on this slide, is what we wanted to do is put as much of this cycle in a team itself. So we wanted to shift that left into teams. So rather than there being some part of the cycle that's in the team, in the dev team, and then that gets handed off, and and then you have other people dealing with the rest of it, and then you have this conflict where it's like, why are you bringing up these changes and stuff? We wanted to put as much as we could into the control of the teams, but bearing in mind, we had to do that in a way where the teams still couldn't touch production themselves. So how do you allow a team to deploy to production whenever they want, and roll back if they need to, etc., when they themselves can't actually go and run anything in production. Which sounds like maybe a impossible thing to solve, but it's not. Well, I think have done something. And that kind of leads me to speaking about the tooling. And so the way we did this, the way we shifted, I'd say, all of this into all of these points in the development lifecycle into the control of the team was using two tools. So I made a joke. I was talking to someone earlier, and I said, luckily I don't work for GitLab, because I was reading the terms of speaking at DevConf, and one of them is you can't be an overt shill for your company, otherwise they're like, that's some bad practice, and they kick you out. You know, you have to actually say useful things. And the way I love GitLab and what we do with it is, I think, maybe enough to get me kicked out. Anyway, so we used GitLab, and then we used a thing called OneDeploy. Now, you guys might be looking at this thing, OneDeploy, and being like, what is it? Where can I get it? I don't know. Well, hopefully I'll convince you it's something that you would like. Unfortunately, you can't. This is something we developed in-house, and you can think of it essentially as a deployment gateway. So it's, you know, basically a dashboard that gives you some view of your deployments, allows you to deploy into production, roll back, check your versions, et cetera, et cetera. And this all integrates with GitLab to enable teams to own, again, I'll go back, to own that whole development lifecycle. So to own that whole development lifecycle while not being able to touch things in production. So how does this all tie together? How does the system fit together? So essentially what we have is we have GitLab, and GitLab we use obviously the version control that comes with GitLab, and rely heavily on that as well as GitLab pipelines. So all of our good CI stuff that, you know, teams should do is done with GitLab pipelines, and that, you know, automatically when you make a change to a repo, first, you know, you go, you get your requirement, you come in, you make your change, and you push that, you create a branch, and then that starts, you know, our steps in the development lifecycle. So then what we've done is we have members of the team that are trusted members of the team that can sign off on changes, right? And so they're in a group, and their approval has to be added to this merge request before that can be merged into the master branch. Then, once that merged into the master branch, following sort of a trunk-based development methodology, we publish, you know, our deployment artifacts, our containers, whatever they may be. And so all of that gets published to a container registry, and then we update tags in GitLab. And that's important because then we have our tool, and our tool OneDeploy. This is not the official icon of OneDeploy. I just like the image of a monkey because I like to think that it enables people to be monkeys in production without actually touching production. Anyway, so what we do then with OneDeploy is we sync across from GitLab, and in doing that, sort of get the status of where we are in terms of versions and stuff of our applications, and see if there's any newly deployable versions or anything along that line. The reason why in the middle there's this thing, API GitLab, is because the GitLab API can be a bit slow and a bit painful to use. So we put this layer in the middle that allows us to cache requests and do various other things. And also we put in authentication into API GitLab so that users themselves or OneDeploy doesn't have to worry about that authentication. That's all done with API GitLab. Then you come in and you get a nice dashboard of all the projects you care about, the deployable versions, the history of versions you have, the versions that can be rolled back to or deployed. And so on a typical day, someone will you know, come and push changes, it all gets through, all gets approved, very nice. And then someone will go in and press that deploy button. What that does is then it goes back. So that goes back to GitLab, and we, again, use a defined GitLab pipeline. And that goes and kicks off jobs that can run in production. That's a special project we have in our GitLab instance that has all those, the requisite rights and access to the correct runners, etc., in GitLab that then goes and deploys things to production. And so what that does is it's a whole automated process using this tool that allows our teams to deploy anything they want to production while not actually being able to touch production themselves. So it's all managed and automated in GitLab. All of it's documented. All of it's codified, rather, not documented. All of it's codified. And it empowers our developers to hopefully go fast. And that kind of leaves us at the little bit of bragging slide where basically, I've put there, all our teams are empowered to get their own changes into production. I'd like to say, so I'm in the DevOps team at Allan Gray, and I'd like to say that we take our own medicine as well. So we strongly believe in codifying the infrastructure that we provision and the infrastructure that we use for deployments, et cetera, et cetera. And so, for example, the tool I showed earlier, OneDeploy, which manages this whole deployment gateway, we also deploy it through this sort of pipeline structure as well. So basically, if we want a new version of OneDeploy, we deploy it with OneDeploy, which leads to some interesting things, because if you break the deployment gateway, when you deploy the deployment gateway, sometimes you can't roll back, and then you have to go do funny things. But that doesn't happen often, although it does happen occasionally. Anyway, but we have now empowered all our teams to go fast. And so I pulled these stats yesterday from OneDeploy. And so we've got like an average of 250 deployments a month, 8 deployments a day. And that, if I remind you, when I started, it was 4 years ago, we were doing like 1 deployment a month, and maybe your application doesn't get on the deployment train because you're a bit slow on the uptake. And using sort of this methodology, we've basically been able to empower teams to run as much of these things as possible through this deployment gateway without having to rely on ops teams. So without having to go to a special ops team and say, hey, you guys, please, we need you to run this or that or the next, we can say, you guys can write an automated way, to run whatever SQL scripts you need or this or that. Can all be managed, codified, can all be pushed to GitLab, can be taken and then published versions into OneDeploy, and then run into production and give you what you need. Yeah. So I see that I'm a little bit early in time, but that's sort of what I have for you. There was one point I thought of while I was talking. Just to go back. The one other thing that OneDeploy does, which I just think is worth mentioning, is this also gives us a whole, this also handles all the auditing and all the data collection and everything we need to see where we are. So it's all very well to try and improve if you don't have, and if you don't collect data when trying to improve, then how do you know you're improving or getting worse, et cetera, et cetera. And so the other thing that's baked into OneDeploy is monitoring, or rather, we save into a database all the deployments, if the deployments are verified, this, that, and next, which allows our internal audit to be very happy, because then they can see exactly what's going on. But it also is very useful for us, because we can go and look at our stats and say, hey, we are actually doing good things, or we're not doing good things, etc. So thank you. That, I think, is what I have for you. I don't know if anyone has any questions, if there's any things that anyone would like me to clarify. Yes?
That was great, thanks. Just want to know, how do you manage your GitLab runners? Because we currently use GitLab.
Yeah.
And I'm also in the DevOps team, and we encounter so many issues. So it's currently codified with Terraform, but obviously the configuration of the software, so trying to install the GitLab runners library making sure we've got the right, whether you want to use like the shell or Docker, runners. How are you guys handling that so far? And is it,
So,
does it scale well? I don't know.
So I think our solution does scale semi-well. So I can say we have more bragging, I think, upwards of 250 applications, separate microservices running in production. So some big number, and this handles that completely fine. To answer your specific question on how we deal with GitLab runners, so we basically have taken a procedural approach to configuring them and deploying them and provisioning them. And so we use a combination of Ansible and Bash scripts. I think very recently, we were doing away with some of the Bash scripts because we had some long Bash scripts that did some funny things. So we've moved that over into Ansible. And then we are also, we are doing a big cloud migration, and so we are doing some provisioning. We're looking at solutions for that using Terraform. So I can't speak to using Terraform, but I can. So Ansible, I don't know if you've used it, but it's sort of fairly simple to use, and so that's kind of how we've dealt with it. And we run all our runners in our Kubernetes cluster, so it all scales very well and handles load and all of that. Yeah. Cool.
Hi. So this answers the question of how you went faster. But I'm still a little bit like, okay, so all the people in Allan Gray that care about the governance,
yeah.
and is this nothing breaking? Are we breaking any laws or taking too much risk? How has that been kind of maintained and addressed, and how do they sleep at night still, even though you're doing this now? So
that's a very good question, and actually I should have hopefully answered that question during the presentation, so thank you very much for asking that. So the way we got to where we are today was informed very much not just by the tech teams, but by people sort of from, I don't know, I can't remember the exact team name right now, but it is basically a governance team. And so it was an iterative process with them. So they came in and they said, hey, okay, this is what we're doing right now, and that was sort of those monthly deployments. And what we realized is then, or what was realized, was that was trying to mitigate risk, but was not doing so successfully at all. So that was trying to mitigate risk, but then you had these big dang deployments where people who were deploying things didn't understand what was going on, and basically things went wrong. And things went wrong in a big way occasionally, and then it was hard to roll back. You had all these issues. And so what we did is we came in and we said, okay, cool, this is not working. Let's try and find something else that does work. And so then we developed this iterative approach. And so it's very much like, okay, cool, so we need to know that things have been properly signed off, we've had enough trusted people look at them, et cetera, before they get to production. And so what we have built into the whole one deploy process is we have sort of three sets of users. So we have general developers. So developers obviously can work in GitLab, they can develop code, and they can push to branches. All of our master branches, if you think of us doing trunk-based development, all of our master branches are protected, and no one can push directly to master. So then, once anyone has raised a merge request, generally we have two people review those merge requests. So one is someone who's like more domain expert. So that'll be some fellow in your team who's got, or out of your team, who has specific knowledge on the change that's being made. Then you also have some like more senior member who's an authorizer of that change. And both of those people will then approve the merge request before it can be merged in. So that deals with that. And all of that is then auditable on GitLab. You can see all of the people who have done that, what's gone into this change that's gone on. So then that publishes all the versions, which gets pulled into one deploy. And again, there's a whole set of rules about who can do what. So not anyone can go and press that deploy button. Again, there are trusted people in I guess, the one deploy ecosystem who, and you will have deployment rights for your specific team, So it's not that anyone from any team can go to another team's project and be like, roll back, joke's on you, There has to, again, there's per projects, there's there's rights managed per what is in GitLab a group, but sort of a team, and a team will own several projects, and in that there'll be several people who have the rights to deploy, you know? And then something as well, so also on the governance side, which I didn't speak to, but is also worth mentioning, I have written notes that I was meant to look at and didn't. We have this whole idea of tagging. So in terms of establishing what these changes are, etc., we have certain requirements in GitLab of what those, and so we use GitLab tags to say, you know, we have various risk ratings, so someone has to add a risk rating to a merge request. Then someone has to add deployment time, so can this be deployed anytime, can this, and sort of to talk about shifting left, that is all in the developer's control. So the developer can go add whatever tags they want. But as part of the review process, the people will come in and check, are these tags, do these tags match what's actually been changed, you know? So this person has said it can be deployed whenever, but I know this system is coupled with this system, and so actually it can't be deployed whenever. There has to be some planning around that deployment, and so you have to use the coordinated deployment tag, rather. So we have various tags, then we also have tags in terms of, I mean, we have requirements in terms of a merge request has to have a description. It has to have, you know, various other things. So that is part of, and sorry, I'm getting into specifics now, but that's part of how we maintain this sort of governance process. And so when all of those criteria are met and the right people merge the change, and et cetera, all of that pulls into one deploy, and if all of those things pass, then, only then, can things be deployed. And all of that is audited, and we save all that data, and so we can see who's done what were the risk ratings associated with this change, et cetera, And one more thing just to talk to, because I think it's important, is we understand in these processes, there are edge cases, sometimes things go wrong. And so then we do have, you know, our product owners generally, or, you know, in the ecosystem who then can say, cool, I understand why things have gone wrong, and I can go and override the fact that this version can't be deployed because it hasn't met all that criteria. And in overriding that, I can make it deployable, so I can verify the version to be deployed, so allow it to be deployable. And then we pull reports on all of that, et cetera, Our governance team goes away, it checks what we're doing, it checks how we're doing and all of these things, and then it's like, okay, cool, you know, we're hitting targets, we're not hitting targets. Why is this funny thing happening in this project, et cetera, you know? I don't know if that's sorry. I should have talked about all of that in the talk, so thank you again for asking the question. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that helps, thanks.
Awesome, fantastic.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, when you were deciding to create the system, did you look at, well, OneDeploy in particular, did you look at other products that were available? Can you recommend for or against any of them? And why did you write your own?
So I can maybe answer the why we wrote our own. I unfortunately can't really answer looking at other tooling. And so basically, sorry, I can't really answer your question because when I came into Allan Gray, I was just a developer, and all of these decisions were being made before I came into the DevOps space. I think the reason we went with a custom system is because our architects don't like when systems have limitations, and so they'll evaluate systems, see that systems have limitations, and be like, nah, we can write our own one, you know? And so I was talking to someone else about how we have a custom log aggregation system in Allan Gray, which is crazy. Why would you write a custom log aggregation system? But we did it, and that's what we use in production for aggregating logs from all of these 250 microservices. So that's why, unfortunately, I can't answer other systems to look at or et cetera. What I can recommend is GitLab, and I guess, so that extends to GitHub or GitOps in general, that sort of development methodology where you codify everything and you codify all your pipelines, then you deploy your pipelines and stuff, has been fantastically useful and fantastically powerful at Allan Gray. So doesn't really answer your question, but yeah, hopefully you know why. Cool. Yes?
One last question from me. I'm actually really interested in the fact that your one deploy tool allows the engineers to still be productive without having to go on the console and then start messing around with things. Not messing around, you know, like just clicking around. So I'm interested to know if you have like some sort of checklist on the actual information that is provided on that dashboard. Because I think that would be useful for me to know, because I'm also trying to figure out a way to limit access without disabling the team. So yeah, this is something you can provide me later if you have capacity in writing.
maybe come up later and I can show you a thing or two, but what I want to say, just maybe in general to answer your question, you were at the last talk as well in this venue, right? Yeah, so what we do at Allan Gray is most projects have, you know, either sort of Helm charts or the values for Helm charts inside the project as well. And so that's what's used. So the team, as part of a commit, you would also modify those if you needed. And so you also in the team control exactly what you would be deploying. And then what this infrastructure essentially does is it takes, so we have, I think, I can list 2 deployment types, but we either have a script deployment type, which can run any script that you give it, as long as it's a bash script, it can run that. And then we have a Kubernetes deployment type, which can deploy Kubernetes objects. And so you say, okay, I'll use either this deployment type or this deployment type in your repo, and we have a file where you say, okay, I want to use this deployment type or that deployment type, and you give a few other values, and then as long as you put the requisite pieces for that. So for example, if you have a script deployment type, you have to have an executable script in the root of your repo, so that's the thing that can be run, and it's called deploy.sh, you know? So that gives a lot of flexibility, because basically it's like you can write any script that you want, and that will be deployed, you know? But that all goes through and is all codified and all goes through the merge request process and stuff like that. So there's a lot of control in that. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. I can also show you the tool after.
Yeah, you can. I think I'll come through.
Cool, awesome.
I just want to ask, how do you manage deployments of one deploy?
So I said at some point in the talk, but deployments of one deploy are also managed through one deploy. Which I think I mentioned, leads to when you break one deploy, then you have to do funny things. And luckily in the DevOps team, we have the access needed to go and do those funny things. But we, and I said it, we take our own medicine. So we don't want to go to teams and be like, hey, you guys do all this. We also believe in codifying as much of our infrastructure as possible, you know, infrastructure as code, and that all goes through one deploy as much as humanly possible. So yes, yeah.
I just wanted to find out, how do you guys handle, like, if somebody adds in a new secret or connection string or something that can't necessarily just be automatically deployed, like it requires human intervention?
So we have, the way we do secrets, so for Kubernetes we have, secret files, and what we do is we have encryption, and we basically, you're not allowed to, or we have, so firstly in our pipeline, we have scanning. So if you commit anything, an unencrypted secret, we'll have scanning in our pipelines that'll say, hey, why is this secret unencrypted? And we'll fail the pipeline and say, okay, you know, this pipeline can't succeed. You've committed unencrypted secrets. Then we have, we've also written in-house encryption tooling, which basically does encryption. So we've got an in-house tool that you'll run to encrypt. We actually, that I could maybe show you if I.
So while you're busy pulling that up, so when you say encrypted secrets, are you saying that the devs actually commit the secrets but encrypted?
Yes.
And then do you run something like Git Guardian or Git Leaks to make sure that they're not committing anything that's not?
So this is a support tool that we've written internally that does encryption of, so if you have a new secret that you need encrypted, so this means none of our developers need to know the password. You can go and say, hey, I want this, and there is the encrypted value, and then this can be used in your Helm chart or wherever, and we'll go and unencrypt that at deploy time.
Okay, so like the devs don't have to keep like a private key or something to encrypt this thing. They just use the tool, and then they use that output value, and that's what they commit.
Yes.
And then your tool actually knows how to decrypt that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. So that tool is part of the deployment sort of process as well. Yeah. Cool. Yeah?
Sorry, another one.
That's okay.
I don't know if it's going to be relevant. So I think the company I was working for, we were doing something very similar.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing something similar where you have an encrypted value that you sort of put in your code, but there was then this problem we needed to solve, which was you still need to ensure that the application has access to that endpoint to decrypt the value. I don't know how that goes on.
So,
what's the flow?
So
how do you manage that?
So in terms of Kubernetes, the way we do that is we'll decrypt the values before we do the Kubernetes deployment. So before it goes into the cluster, it will be decrypted. So we won't have a service running in production that decrypts on read. What we do is we inject our secrets as environment variables into our container, just using Kubernetes default stuffs. And before we do the deployment, so it's part of the deployment process. So we'll decrypt the values, and then we'll do the deployment.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Any further questions? Cool. Thank you so much.